So thank you very much, everyone. I hope we had an opportunity to have a good lunch before we've been all putting our eyes on the main stage. And before we get started with our panel, I'd like to invite a partner in crime from BCG, a managing director and senior partner from BCG, Alex Kostner, who has actually been working with us since Davos 2022. He's leading the software or the tech for automotive at BCG globally, and has been working with OEMs, startups, and other companies in the value chain on digital cabin, on the software-driven vehicle, on monetizing on the software opportunity. So let's get prepared for the panel with a few statements from Alex.
Thank you so much, Maya. So it's fantastic to be here, and thank you so much for the collaboration with the World Economic Forum as well. So we had the pleasure to drive together the software-defined vehicle, and I guess that is one of the key topics that you see wherever you go here on the fair. So it's fantastic to talk a little bit about this. So look, I just want to send a couple of short messages before we get our distinguished panelists up on stage. And the first message I want to give is there's huge potential. We are talking approximately 1.2 trillion potential out of software and electronics by 2035. The driver behind that is there's increasing willingness to pay by all the consumers for especially sophisticated functionality. If you think about ADAS, if you think about digital cabin, immersive experiences in the vehicle, all of those require fairly expensive technology in the vehicle. So we expect that there's about $1 out of every $4 in 2035 in a car that will be related to this kind of experiences that come out of this. In addition, as I guess you have seen, there's competition that is fast increasing from the Chinese OEMs that are coming in, plus we have the switch over to e-mobility, and all of this is putting a lot of short-term pressure. So the second message I want to give is, in order to now get to this value creation, we actually need to come together as an industry and work on the ecosystem, as Maya was just mentioning. And the first thing we noticed, we actually brought together about 30 executives from across the industry to work together on creating that value. But the first thing we noticed was people actually talk very different languages. So we had to start from even establishing a common understanding of what is a software-defined vehicle, what are the elements. What you can see here are some of the layers and the agreement by automotive firms, technology firms, suppliers. This is how we call things now. We were also mapping all the ecosystem value creation cases that can be imagined. And one item that was very clear is you cannot take value out of just selling data, as has been thought about for quite a while, but it is really about bringing together hardware, software, a digital service, and many different parties. So that brings me to the third point, which is we really need to step change the collaboration in the industry. I think if we look at kind of the journey from early stage software vehicles, which were just a little bit connected, all the way to the right-hand side of this page, where you can really see a big scope explosion and ADAS and digital cabin capabilities, you really need to step change the ability to work together as an industry. And I think it's fair to say that right now, still most players are very concerned about their data, their control points, their part of the value chain. So how do we step change this? Well, there's a few items that I think we all need to work on. The first one is, and happy to work on that also in the context of our partnership, to establish more of a platform for the industry. One vehicle platform that can be shared across the industry as opposed to everybody building their own and trying then to work together. The second one is working through the associations that are there and actually building scale in that. And the third one, adopting the right mindset of ecosystems. So accepting that it's not all the value with me, but I'd rather partner with others, create bigger value bucket, and then can be shared among others. So just in summary, big potential overall. We need to move to the ecosystems, and clearly the collaboration needs to shift big time. And I think this sets the stage also nicely if you look at the players that we now have on stage, which we will introduce in a second. But we bring together a Chinese perspective, a technology perspective, and a more classical supplier perspective. So I think this well reflects these 3 points, and I wish you a lot of fun with that.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you.
Well, let's get started. Allow me to call into the stage our distinguished panelists, starting with Dr. Brian Gu. Dr. Brian Gu needs little introduction, like most of our panelists today. He's actually an honorary vice chairman and a co-president of XPeng, and has spent 20 years in the investment industry, including a massive role with JP Morgan Asia Pacific. Thank you so much for joining. And I'll call on stage Derek Derek Litzmeyer is actually the CEO of TT Tech Auto, also with over 20 years of experience working on software for vehicles. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk about safety and your aspirations there in just a bit. And of course, last but most definitely not least, Nakul Dugal, who has flew in from the US representing Qualcomm, not only an SVP at Qualcomm, but also the general manager of their auto tech and cloud computing services, has been with Qualcomm for almost 30 years now. And it really is the man to blame for Qualcomm's success for the past 12 years, focused on automotive. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, without further ado, we are to discuss how do we unleash the power of an integrated mobility ecosystem with the nuanced towards vehicles. Just to say, if you were expecting to hear something else, then maybe that's the time to leave. Because we are focused on an opportunity nowadays where we shift from a vehicle, a product, into a software-driven opportunity. And that opportunity comes with a lot of risks and investments that are kind of long-term. So taking an investment perspective as well as a company that is entering that space rather new. Tell us a bit more, Brian. What are the key business models that can drive an effective transformation?
Well, thank you, Maya, and very glad to be here on stage. First of all, let me just give a little bit background on XPeng. We're a China-based smart EV company, and also I want to just say that we always want to define the mission, not just to building EV, but we want to focus on the intelligence part of the mobility. That's why I think we pour a lot of our R&D into the intelligence areas. For example, if you look at our headcounts, close to 40% of our total staff is in the area of R&D. But what's more special about that is close to half of this R&D staff actually is in the area of software versus hardware, as typically in the OEM companies. The reason we actually focus on software is that we believe in developing a full stack software capabilities in-house. Because I think, and I'll go into details why we think it's important, especially when we are designing a product, we want to unify the full stack capability from the software side and hardware side to be able to provide the best optimal outcome. So your question about how does that generate value and how do I envision the business model, I think there's several different areas we can actually look into. First of all, having the full stack software capability actually allows you to really efficiently pursue R&D. If we look at our product development, we actually are able to combine our full stack capability with hardware product design into a platform. And that platform today we call SEPA 2.0, which is the smart architecture for smart EV design. Using the full stack capability shortens our development time by up to 20% across the platform that will deploy for future smart EVs. At the same time, if you look at the software development for each of the model, using that full stack capability, we can reduce the adaptation cost for operating system adaptation by up to 60%. And also for ADAS functions, we can actually reduce development costs by up to 50%. So there's a huge efficiency to be gained by having a full stack software capabilities in-house. So that's the first element of having that value proposition. The second element is actually the user engagement side. So for a company that has your own ability to develop software and upgrade software, your ability to OTA your products is much greater. So you'll be more responsive to your customer needs. You actually are able to actually design features more quickly and more robustly and under your own control of timetable. So that's another fact I think will generate tremendous value when we actually are delivering our product to the customers. And on top of it, you can actually also ability to design very advanced features. For example, we actually are very proud of our own autonomous driving capabilities in volume produced vehicles. So XPeng vehicles in China actually are able to be used in a very high degree of autonomous driving capability in what we call the XNGP. So in city scenarios, actually the vehicle can navigate mostly on its own without human intervention, probably I think minimal human intervention. So that capability is something only possible with the full stack software capability. So the final point I want to make is that how does that generate money and monetization for the company. I think the software capability gave you a number of different ways to generate value. First of all, it's much more scalable to have a software capability amortized over your fleet. This is actually something that if you can achieve a greater scale in your delivery numbers, actually it will generate a lot of value. Secondly, the software capability allow you to develop some of the technologies and user features that's very differentiated. As I mentioned, the XNGP capability in China is actually something that no other EV company are currently able to provide. So we actually allow our vehicles to have a very differentiated features, and we can actually charge a premium for those vehicles to be sold to the public. And thirdly, obviously, is the software ability to partner with your another strategic partners, and you can monetize through partnership and amortize over not just your own fleet, maybe over additional fleets that's being produced and launched by your partners. For example, our recent announcement with Volkswagen. So these holistically will actually drive tremendous value for our company.
Fantastic, Brian. And you added a few really important and interesting data points on top of the data points we heard from Alex. So we think of 650 billion market cap by 2030, about a quarter of the value of a car that will be put on the road back then, or then when we reach that point. And you're talking about efficiency, agility, the ability to deliver and to control your system, as well as capitalize on fleets of others. I think that's beautiful. And when I think about that, Derek, you've been working with companies that are in pursuit of this goal. What can you tell us about the features of a company that would likely be more successful than others in implementing that change, especially incumbents?
Thank you, Maya. So first of all, I think we talk a lot about software-defined vehicle. It's all about software-defined vehicle here. And if we look at cars, cars are systems, in my opinion. So software alone is not enough. So important system-level properties like safety, security should also be part of this expression. That's why actually we started to call it 4SDV. So 4SDV stands for system, safety, security, and software-defined vehicle. And I think this describes a little more the current challenges, what we currently have. So in my opinion, one of the big challenges is fast introduction of new functions in vehicles, in cars. So we want to have not waiting 5 years until there's a new functionality in the car. We want to have it fast. And what we also need is reusability of software platforms. So that's, in my opinion, two major challenges we have to tackle. And therefore, we need to have, it's again, that's why I like the expression 4SDV more than only SDV. It all starts with the architecture, with the system itself. So if you don't have the appropriate architecture, like an EE architecture in a vehicle, everything else will be very difficult. So part of this EE architecture already has to be safety and security. So that needs to be an inherent part of this architecture, and then only software development becomes feasible or successful. But that's necessary, but not sufficient. You know, to be fast, you also need a highly automated software engineering process in order to have like daily builds, releases quickly made to be able to test it, so that the OEM at the end can focus on the application development. So, and that's what we are actually providing, this middleware, abstracting the hardware below, enabling fast releases and then application focus for the OEMs.
Sounds like a huge challenge for incumbents. And that actually is a great segue to you, Nicole, because you've been working with companies in all stages and all strategies, and you've been trying to provide a tailored solution for all of them. Walk us through that process of tailoring and partnering full on.
Yeah, so thank you again for having me, and good to see all of you. I think automotive has actually been a pretty exceptional journey for us, because we as a technology company, we have access to a lot of different technologies and a lot of different markets at the same time. So in that sense, we are fortunate in that Qualcomm has a very wide variety of experiences that we go through on a daily basis. If you think about semiconductors, we have to exist in the latest process node. We have to ramp to hundreds of millions of devices within the first year of that process node. If you think about the pace at which consumer devices move, we have to be able to iterate consumer technology on an annual basis. And when we started to engage in the automotive industry, what became pretty clear was that there was going to be disruption. It was going to happen soon. When it would happen, where it would start was not completely clear. And I think electrification became this catalyst that forced automakers to drive towards a new electrical architecture because something had to force that big change, which was really a horizontal change across the world. You know, we've been at this, I've been doing automotive at Qualcomm for over a decade now, and what I think we have seen is that the vision for how the car architecture changes is actually pretty accurate from what I remember, you know, learning and listening 10 years ago to what we are actually talking about, central compute, etc. These are not new concepts, but the embracing of the complexity where you can take an application processor that has 20 billion transistors that is going to have massive amount of virtualization, driving the kind of cockpits that we are seeing today, getting comfortable with that type of software complexity, doing autonomous driving at massive scale like what Brian was talking about. This pace of change has happened because of how much competition, how much disruption there has been across the, what has traditionally been a very, conservative ecosystem. And we see this across the board. I think, Maya, like you mentioned, we work with everybody. We have a business model that allows us to really see every single automaker, every single tier one across the planet. And we have a pretty good idea as to if things are moving fast, why that is happening. Within an organization, if things move fast in other places they don't, also why that is happening. And when things are moving slower, what the reasons are. So we are fortunate in that we have this vantage point that gives us this very unique perspective. And what is pretty clear is that what we are developing for the next generation is 10x more complex than what we are doing now. So this industry has this propensity to be able to just absorb a massive amount of technology complexity because, frankly, I think the car as a platform, as a mobility platform, is like none other. It's a very unique platform to differentiate on.
That's a fantastic point on the vantage point that you have on seeing how pace might change, maybe horizontally, but maybe vertically, and the reasons for that. And that actually loops back into Brian, because you have this amazing insight into one of the most interesting automotive markets today, the fastest, the largest since 2009 already by sales and production, but also the fastest to adopt EVs and arguably the fastest to adopt smart solutions. What would you say would be the best market to adopt an ecosystem approach, a system and collaborative approach? Is it China? Is it elsewhere? And what are the core challenges, and are they the same?
Well, I think, Maya, you're right. I mean, China is, in my view, actually leading many ways of, really applying advanced autonomous driving technology on volume-based vehicles. Just using our own experience as an example, we actually recently launched a brand new model called G6. That model actually was launched in July. It actually has this high degree of ADAS capability that most of drivers can actually leave the car driving in Chinese streets, busy streets, recognizing all the street scenarios and patterns with minimal intervention. And we thought because we had to charge a premium for that model, because that probably charge a few thousand US$ more. Maybe only a niche group of people will go for that because it's expensive. But the result is actually very astonishing that the Chinese consumers embracing that technology wholeheartedly. So when we launched, immediately we saw more than 70% of our orders are actually the top category, people demanding that technology to be used in Chinese cities. What's even more exciting is we start delivering those products now and then making those available to customers in large cities in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen, and they start using the features. It's amazing how high the penetration rate of the smart driving technology is now. In Beijing, the drivers who has that function, that capability, the penetration is more than 99%. That means that they always turn it on because that's become the part of their daily driving life. So those are things that's happening in a large market in China. We start to see the inflection point happening. So I think going back to the point is that yes, there's a lot of investment and development has been poured into the autonomous driving technology. There's a lot of advancement in hardware, in computing power, in software. But really, we're seeing an inflection point happening in a large market in China where smart driving technologies, high degree of autonomous driving capabilities become a must-have factor for purchase decisions. So with that, I think this is actually a very important point because now we're focused on the next challenge, which is making that technology into a much wider segment of the population by making a lower cost and covers more areas. People can be more ubiquitous to use that. So I think with those kind of rapid development, you start to see an ecosystem building. It goes back to your original question about commercialization, because if people are relying on these features, people are needing to have that in their daily drives, then you can start thinking about other ways of charging for it. Instead of making the car more expensive for a few thousand US dollars, you can charge per trip, you can charge per time, per mileage. There's a lot of ways that you can think about ways to change your commercialization model. So I think that goes back to the whole ecosystem. Clearly, software is a large part of it, but also working with top partners like Qualcomm. Qualcomm is also one of our partners in China. Additional capabilities and developing the top-notch system for driving, and also ultimately making that slowly towards at some point a robotaxi scenario. I think that will be really disruptive to current mobility experiences, and that's going to be the future.
Yeah. And I really hope that you can introduce some of these technologies and try to uplift us as consumers outside of China as well, especially with your partnership.
We'd love to be in Germany as well, in Europe and globally.
And that warrants actually a question to the audience. If you may raise your hand, if you have ever test-driven an autonomous vehicle, have you ever been in a driving autonomous vehicle? Raise your hand. Hi, so we can see. Map the room. Not that many of us. Look at that. I would say 5% or so. So there is a long way to go before everybody is exposed to the potential of autonomous driving. But have you ever used ADAS? Prevalent, quite prevalent. And then sort of warrants, I see you smile, Nicole, and I think you have been looking, as you stated, on the various trends that we see and the different demand areas. Any thoughts there to share on what peaks up better, faster, and where?
We have a large untapped market. That is for sure. I think I agree with Brian's comments on the adoption of ADAS and really the whole idea of automated driving in China. And I would like to contrast it with what I have seen outside of China, because I think the Chinese consumer, first of all, is a different kind of consumer in the sense that there is a very large market that is coming into, buying new cars, especially after the pandemic, wanting to have personal space, wanting to get into a new type of ownership. And the Chinese infrastructure, in my mind, actually lends itself very well to be able to have high-scale autonomy, because you do have the ability for a large number of OEMs to be able to go focus on that very specific market. I have driven in the G6 when I was there back in May. It was a fantastic experience, but more than that, it was actually an experience where once you get comfortable with it, you actually start to trust the car to be able to go do all of the right things for you. And as I think about how does that translate over to other markets, it really just comes down to you have to be able to think about the specific market, the infrastructure in that specific country. Does it lend itself to the same level of predictability? What are the expectations from a safety perspective? What are the costs that you have to be able to add? So for me, I think we've been looking at this market for a very long time. There are 3 different tiers. There is the mandate tier, and the definition of the mandate varies by market. There is the what you would call the convenience and comfort tier, where you want a certain level of autonomy, and then there is a robotaxi tier. They all have criteria that are market specific, economics involved with that specific end platform, the infrastructure availability. And I would say that at this point in time, the technology problem for the most part is solved. There is enough technology out there. there is enough ability to be able to collect the right data, process it, have the right end silicon to be able to go implement it. So then the question really comes down to consumer adoption, focus on safety, the investment required by OEMs to be able to actually make this a platform that they can deploy in a safe way, and which market is asking for it. So I go back again to China, which is able to bring a lot of differentiated features, a lot of differentiated value proposition in a very concentrated market, which then forces the rest of the world to say, okay, we know this technology exists, we know it is possible, how do we react in this environment? That doesn't mean that every other part of the world is going to be able to move at the same pace, because the costs involved in being able to deploy this in other parts of the world vary quite a bit. So the technology is available, but the deployment costs to go actually expand it vary. And that is kind of what you're seeing. So our focus has really been very regimented. We want to be able to build the silicon that is needed, because that is something we understand really well. We are building the stack where we believe that there is a sweet spot for what we are focused on. And then the markets that we are partnering in heavily really are, I would say, a union of the two, in that we partner very broadly with many stack providers, with OEMs, obviously, with tier ones. And that allows us to be able to make sure that we are able to service this market, because for us, what is important is to be able to serve it on a period of time. Right? We think about this over a 5-year or a 10-year time frame. We don't think of it in terms of what do we have to do in the next 12 months. Those things are planned. Those things are not going to change as much. But the strategy has to be a much longer strategy. So that allows us to be able to be nimble in terms of really maximizing the area under the curve.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nicole. And you've mentioned safety, and that really provides for a breeding ground for partnerships, because that's where we actually need each other to be able to progress. And that's where we can gain some attention from policymakers and these ODDs, these environments that we want to operate in that have multiple players also on the road and exposed and vulnerable potentially to vehicles. And Derek, you've been working on safety, and that has been one of your goals at TT Tech Auto. Can you tell us a bit more about where the challenges are?
Thank you very much, Maya. And I think you placed me very well in the middle, because we provide the middleware between Nakul and Brian, responsible for the hardware for the SoC, and he wants to have all the functions and don't care about what is the hardware. That's why I'm sitting in the middle. And also in the World Economic Forum, when we work together, that's a big discussion, because that's something the driver does not see. It just wants to have it function. He wants to experience certain functions in the car without taking care of what kind of hardware is deployed, what kind of things are in the car. You just want to have it safe. And I think you mentioned it as well. Safety is a big topic. There's a lot of technological challenges saved already, but safety is a big topic, in my opinion. And you also mentioned it, things are getting more and more complex. So in the past, we had hundreds of ECUs in the car with embedded software. It was not so, I would say, not so difficult to handle. But now you have multiple SoCs, distributed high-performance compute power in the car, how to orchestrate that, how to make sure you fulfill real-time requirements. And that's what I said. So we calculated this once, so there's more possibilities than atoms in the universe in kind of how many possibilities you have to schedule such a system. And then you have hundreds of different requirements. So scheduling is more and more complex, because you are so great in building such great hardware, but makes it more complex for everybody to integrate in the car. And that's what we try to solve. And again, as I said, what we realize is you need to have right from the beginning the right architecture. If you have an architecture, and we propose, for example, an architecture for level 4 with 4 different elements, I don't go into detail here. Of course, it costs maybe at the beginning a little bit more, but it enables you much more than upgrading and updating over lifetime, and it makes it safe and secure at the end.
Well, you're talking a bit about how challenging it can be for us to be able to work together on a single platform, but we're not really touching on why is it so challenging. We know the money is there. We know the users want it, or future users would like that. But tell us a bit more, maybe one by one. What is that one challenge that you hope would be solved in the coming, say, let's say not 12 months, in the coming 2 to 3 years? What is the one thing that if overcome, sky's the limit?
Well, I think, as Nicole mentioned that, technology-wise, I think we're on our way. I mean, I can see, it's getting there. And I think consumers are embracing it. As I referenced to China, maybe it take much, probably longer outside of China. But I think one thing that it will take a long time to solve is the legal framework and regulatory framework that we need to actually overcome to make these technologies and also the future application of these technologies readily available and in a framework that people can use and understand the boundaries. I think right now, I can just say in China, clearly the government is very encouraging the development of technology and also setting up test zones to really try out the new sort of driverless cars and robotaxi experiments. But in order to change the real regulatory environment to allow the widespread use of these technology, I think we're still sometimes away. And that requires, I think, a concerted effort by the OEMs, by the consumer groups, by the government and bodies of opinion leaders to really come together to figure out a solution. So to me, that's probably the biggest hurdle we have to cross before we can actually have these being a reality.
So a harmonized regulatory environment
right.
across region, potentially, once we are able. Great. Derek?
So for me, it's as I sit in the middle, it's the middleware, and I think it's like an operating system, or your iOS on your iPhone or your Android. Basically, you don't pay for it. You only pay for the applications, but without your iOS or Android, your phone doesn't work at all. And the same is pretty much in the car. You experience the functions, but you need to have the operating system. So I would like to have more focus on that. Also higher attention that requires collaboration between, again, all parties. That we kind of having a standard, and that's currently also the biggest hurdle. Most of the SOP delays are due not to the function, it's due to the integration of the software and hardware. And that's what we are working on. That's where I would like to have more focus, and I would like that you remember 4 SDV is the challenge, not only SDV is the challenge.
Thank you so much, Derek.
Now, I'll give you a slightly different perspective. See, if you think about monetization of software, this is a very common thing today in the industry. If you think about the last 25 years, there is just massive amount of monetization going on. Why does it not happen as easily in the automotive space? I think one thing to keep in mind is that the automotive industry by nature is not a software-first industry, right? It's a hardware-first industry. And as a lot of companies try to transform, for example, XPeng is a software-born automaker. Software isn't something that XPeng had to think about when XPeng was created. But a number of companies that are trying to make the transition, their experiences have a lot to do with how do you balance between making sure that you provide the same quality, the same reliability, maintain your reputation. The risk barrier is much higher to be able to go make a sudden change, and therefore things are just done a different way. It's highly process-oriented, and to Brand's point, regulation starts to kick in because in some sense, regulations follow past experiences. The China phenomena that we've talked about is an example of how when you want to be able to bring a massive rate of change, you're able to do things quickly. You do have to look away towards certain things. The whole idea of I can update software every week or every month isn't a traditional thing in the larger auto industry. So what you kind of have to keep in mind is that there are many different experiences that the auto industry is living at the same time, and you're not going to see those change overnight. Competition will change some of that. And in the presence of these many different experiences, you don't have the common underlying framework in terms of how to think about a problem statement. Because everybody's framework is based upon their risk profile, their way of making sure this is a product that I can deal with. And that, frankly, is probably one of the biggest reasons why the pace of change is slow, because I'm sure every automaker can tell you we can go much faster if we were to not do X, Y, and Z. But we will never launch a product if we did not do X, Y, and Z, which is why this is how we go do it. And I think in some markets, things will move faster because competition will force that. One thing I would say, though, and I'm sure my colleagues will agree, the auto industry is changing at a massive pace. So a lot of these things are going to be looked at over and over again. And once those, like ADAS is a very good example. People understand how to solve the ADAS problem. The question is, when you go deploy a product that has to survive for 20 years, what are all of the things that you have not thought about? And how do you make sure that you protect for those? How do you make sure that you fix them safely? Those are the reasons why there is caution, there is care taken. I don't think it is anymore a technology problem per se. There are a couple of different variants, but it's not like how it used to be where everybody did their own. There is definitely a lot of defragmentation that has happened, and whatever will remain will be what OEMs are starting to get comfortable with, and then it's simply a question of how quickly can you move. Do you understand the risk?
Yeah. No, I think we got some great perspective, and I'd like to turn to the audience. If any questions, we do have a roaming mic here, so feel free to raise your hand, and we'll allude to you. But just to sort of reflect back on the key challenges, so we have a regulatory landscape that is not harmonized yet and really makes it difficult to predict and to plan and to integrate and to monetize properly on products, if I'm to translate in my own words. We have a software, a middleware issue where it actually, if we can capitalize on that across, then we will be better off than having different operating systems. And then we have to look ahead, and Nicole, your insight gave us this perspective of, well, let's see how can we mitigate risks along the way, but also address them as we go and move, say, in incremental steps, because this is definitely a massive change that we are not going to dial back on. We're headed towards the future, and the future is already now, versus the visions that we've been talking about maybe 2 years ago when we were sitting here at IAA. So let's see if we have any questions from the audience. We have a shy audience today. Great. That gives me another opportunity to ask us the final question. And that would be, what would you like the audience here and the audience online watching this live stream to go home with? What is that one message that you hope folks here, many executives in the audience, would implement in the work ahead?
Well, I would say that, being here in IAA, I think I can sense the excitement about, the new energy and electric vehicles. And in China, what we saw was there's a tremendous wave of, EV opportunity that has emerged. I think 3 years ago went from single-digit penetration to now more than 30% penetration in new energy. But I think the bigger revolution is actually what's after the electrification wave, what I call smartification wave, because that actually is what will define the future of mobility. So in China, the cars that has advanced driving technology is probably low single digit again. And I think in the next 3 to 5 years, it will probably be 30, 40% or even greater. And that wave, I think, will be even bigger than the electrification wave, because that actually can impact the way people use mobility and how mobility is going to shape people's lives.
Fantastic. Derek.
So as I already said, so I would like that you remember the 4 SDV concepts, so system, safety, security, and software. And since I'm again sitting between Asia and America, I also want that, I think, for we in Europe, as Europeans, we can be a little bit more bolder, and we should be faster. I think that's what we can learn from left and right. And if we accelerate and if we are fast, I think then we have all the ingredients to be successful and master this huge and massive transformation I also see ahead of us.
Fantastic. And partnerships, I guess. We already see partnerships.
Yes.
And regional partnerships to continue. Nicole.
Yeah, I think something that you started off with, monetization is, so how do you change the monetization dynamics in the automotive ecosystem? You have to be able to embrace software. If you don't embrace software, you cannot monetize. I think Brian gave a lot of very good examples as to why China is able to move so much faster. So I think the underlying premise really is the the only way you can make the car or the mobility platform monetizable is that it has to be a digital-first platform. If you cannot do that, this is just a very long, painful journey. And the organizations that are right in the middle of this transition, this transformation, there is a tremendous amount that you have to learn from what is going on outside in addition to what is going on inside. Because the problems, like I've said, have been solved. It's not like these problems are not solved. So it's really about what you have to change internally to be able to get there. So to me, it really is how quickly does the industry change to be able to embrace this digital-first platform. And I think once that is in place, I think the automotive industry has a fantastic opportunity to really change the way that the business model of mobility works.
Fantastic. And you're actually looping back into Brian's point on, thinking system. This is going to be a new way of using mobility, moving things and people. And we're really changing the architecture from inside in and outside as well. So that's a great conversation. Thank you so much for contributing and for representing organizations and some geographical representation as well. And I hope to see you here in 2 years again. And thank you for your long-term partnership with us as well at the forum.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian.
I didn't ask you about AI.
Oh, yeah.